Welcome to A Fresh Face in Hell. I'm your host, Jonathan Evison. Every week we talk to somebody new and interesting, somebody intellectually curious, somebody who will hopefully renew our faith in this cold, cruel world we live in. A Fresh Face in Hell. Today my guest is Steve Turner, whose super fuzzy, big, muffy guitar sound is synonymous with what we call the Seattle sound. You might know Steve from a little band called Mudhoney, but his Seattle musical roots go a lot deeper than that. Ducky Boys, anyone? Spoolie Numa, Mr. Epp, Monkey Wrench, and I'm sure I'm forgetting 5 or 6 in there.
Limp Richards.
Limp Richards. I forgot you were in the Limp Richards. So yeah, Steve is as Seattle as they come. You and Mark, I think, to me, are like you guys are the godfathers of the Seattle punk rock movement. I first met Steve in 1982 at the Showbox Theater on First and Pike. I believe it was a TSOL show. Steve was a couple years older than me. I immediately looked up to him. We had a similar aesthetic with the skinny jeans and the Vans shoes and the old man shirts. And I'm proud to say that, 40 odd years later, he's still in my sphere of influence, and I'm lucky to call him a friend. Before, obviously I want to delve into your whole music experience, starting at teenage Steve and eventually working to the folk music, which I find fascinating always. But I want to talk to Steve the collector today, because, I've been, like myself, I know you're an avid record collector, but I think we're kind of maybe different types of collectors.
Okay.
I want to kind of explore I want to kind of take a mind walk through collecting, because, there's sorters, there's hoarders, there's the real anal retentive kind of people who won't even like play or look at the stuff they have. And then there's slobs like me. Tell me about your record collection, the breadth, the depth, how it started.
Well, I guess it started in second grade. For some reason, I bought an Elvis Presley record at a garage sale for 50 cents or something. And my parents had a few records. There was a couple of Clancy Brothers records, Irish folk music, that I loved. And there was a Leadbelly 10-inch from the 50s. And there was Dory Previn's first record, On My Way to Where. And those were the records I connected with. My brother then bought a K-Tel Best of the 60s, like box set. And I like some of those songs.
Those are great records. When I first started recollecting, I'd go to record stores and buy those up for 99 cents. It was like, they're like a jukebox.
They are great, yeah. And some of the things that stood out to me at a young age were, foretelling the future kind of. There was Pushing Too Hard by the Seeds that I thought was one of the greatest songs ever, and I still do. Creedence Clearwater Revival, I really like them. And a lot of the 70s stuff didn't really hit me much, except pop radio like Willie Don't Be a Hero or Billy Don't Be a Hero, and those kind of like...
Billy Don't Be a Hero.
And the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And I realized what I liked was songs that told a story, a lot of them. What's the Brandy about the sailors and the bartender?
Brandy, you're a fine... It's about a cruise stop, basically, right?
Yeah. And I realized, years later that it was kind of the storytelling of songs that I liked. But then I got, hijacked by punk rock for a long time.
Am I to believe that you never stopped collecting once during that time? You just started in second grade and you've been amassing records ever since?
Well, it really started in 1979 when punk rock invaded skateboarding. And, I was a total skate kid. And, when the pros got into punk rock, Steve Olson, Dwayne Peters, Jay Smith, we all kind of followed suit. And I realized I actually really liked the music, My first concert was Devo in 1980. And, a few days later, I saw Black Flag and Soldier. And that was kind of it for me, seeing teenagers on stage just making a racket. I fell in love with that idea. And a few years later, I'm not going to go all the way through like everything that happened, but a few years later, I got really into 60s garage compilations like the Nuggets and Pebbles and Boulders and all those kinds of things.
So would that include Trog, Sonics?
Yeah. And like
Question Mark and the Mysterians?
Yeah, but obscure things I'd never heard of either. And I realized that those like the 60s records that they were saying like were really rare and hard to find. I realized like all these weird little punk rock singles that were coming out were going to be that exact same thing. So I started buying anything. I've always joked I'll buy anything for $1. And, I would buy anything that was kind of self-released or looked like punk rock or new wave or something weird, if it was cheap. And
was this because you were shrewd or because you just wanted the music?
Well, because I didn't know what it was. So I was just kind of curious. And there was, in 1984, there was an issue of Maximum Rock and Roll, a guide to record collecting by Tesco V, a guide to punk rock record collecting. And it was just pages of photos of 7-inch singles. So I kind of put it in my head, if I see any of these singles, I will buy it. But I went way down other, paths than just looking for anything weird. And if it was cheap and I didn't know what it was, I would buy it. Unfortunately, if I already had the record and I saw another one cheap, I wouldn't buy it, which, now some of those records that I didn't buy because I already had a copy are worth, thousands of dollars.
Yeah, tell me about it. My story is very sad because, I had all the old SST, the original pressings, all the Discord, the SSD control, only 500 copies pressed. I had all that stuff because I had my fanzine. And what I had learned as a little leaguer was I would write the front office of the baseball team and write them a letter from a cute little kid. And they would send me like wristbands, signed autographed team photos, pennants, all this swag. And so when I was 13 and I started a fanzine, I'm like, hey, I'm going to write to Alternative Tentacles and Discord and say, hey, I want to review your record. Will you send me free copies? Yeah. So I got all these like early pressings of this stuff. And then I graduated high school. I kind of got I kind of moved away from punk and into jazz by the time I was like a junior in high school. And then so I sold them all to this guy, Mike Brundage, for, he gave me a fair market value for him, but God, I've been to some record shows now and I could have bought a house with that stuff.
Yeah.
And so he feels sorry for him. I still run into him at the deli now and then. And like I was looking for that Necros record, that first Necros record, and I didn't have one, and he kind of threw me a bone because he had a couple copies. So yeah, I've got a forever sort of asset in him, but man, it hurts.
Yeah, yeah.
So what do you have? Like
I had a guy like you back then that I was buying records from, Jeff Jebanini. He was at Mercer Island. Well, he wasn't from Mercer Island, but he was cousins with one of my skater friends on Mercer Island, and he had a fanzine whose name escapes me now. Back in like '79, like he was the first punk rocker I met, because he came to check out our half pipe and see what we were about. And he got into some trouble with drugs 3 years later, like 83, 84. And I ran into him and he was selling a bunch of singles at Fallout one day. And, they're giving him 50 cents a single. I said, outside, I said, like, I'll give you more money than that. Call
55
me.
cents?
Yeah. I mean, $2 instead of 50 cents or something. But I got such an amazing collection from him through the years, and he's a little bitter about it. But I mean, I got things like the Urinals, things I'd never would have heard of, the Pagans, all these just classic late 70s American punk rock singles, because he got them all free for his fanzine. And so he kind of did the same thing that you were doing.
So now your collection, but what kind of collector are you? Are you just like meticulous, like you don't play some of this stuff because it's cherry, or because I'm like, nah. I suck up all the records, but for me, it's just, I compare it to like the Americans and the French. Like the people think Americans are materialists, but really we're abstractionists. We don't order lobster thermidor, we order the menu. Whereas the French, they have 200 cheeses. They're truly materialists. That's how I am with the music. I just want the music. So I remember once in Rainy Day Records, I got a first printing of Graceland, and it was still, cellophane open. The guy's like, yeah, that's a good one. Hang on to that. Don't open it. And I'm like, well, that's the whole point. I want to go home and listen to this. I want to hear that song, Homeless. And I'm terrible. My friends, I'm not an audiophile. Are you a real audiophile about it?
No, not at all.
You don't clean the record before you play each one?
No.
Yeah, me neither. I sometimes don't even put them back in the jacket.
Yeah. And I don't care about 20 years ago when my girlfriend was pregnant with my son Milo, I realized that I could start selling some of these records and not have to work and be home when he's, young. So I started selling all these rare punk records. And it kind of flipped a switch in my brain where I was no longer really a collector as much as I was a dealer.
That's what
And
I wanted to ask you about, like,
Yeah.
because I can't imagine, unless I don't like the record. I don't think I've ever sold a record. I got a couple of free Father John Misty records from Sub Pop when I wrote those liner notes for Green River that I'd be happy to part
Yeah.
with if you know anybody. I've picked up some records that I don't like, but what is it like for you to sell a record that you really love just because you could get the money to?
Well, the first record I sold was this really, really rare punk single called Jackie Shark and the Beach Butchers. And I had the only known copy in the world because I used to write letters and all that kind of stuff to other collectors and like make mixtapes of like mystery records that I had that I didn't know what they were. And
use them like as your the app that would tell you who it
like,
was?
I figured somebody has got to know what this thing is. And that one, nobody knew what it was. And finally, a second copy was found in a collector in Italy had it. And because like some of these other collectors thought that it was like I had recorded the record myself and it was like a kind of a fake punk thing. Because a couple people did that through the years, like to kind of prank the punk collectors because they were getting more and more, crazy with the record collecting stuff. And so I said, I didn't do this record. Believe me, this is too good. I couldn't have done this record. But a second copy was found, so a guy offered me $1,000 for it. And I told my girlfriend, and she's like, do you know how many hours I have to work to make $1,000? So I said, good point. But it was kind of the crown jewel because it was like this totally hot punk single that nobody knew what it was from 1978. And so I sold it, and that for $1,000. And I looked around my house at that point, and I realized there was nothing inside the house that I wouldn't sell for $1,000. Not a guitar, nothing. I didn't own anything that in my mind was worth more than $1,000. So that
says to me you're a great dad too. I mean, something more, being a dad's even more important than punk records.
Yeah.
But what's that record worth now? Do you cringe to think?
It's worth less now because the story gets even weirder. He was finally found. I thought it was a New York record, but it turned out it was a California guy way out, like near Ontario or somewhere way deep in the valley, like a desert rat kind of guy. And they finally found him through, there's people that hunt down these old people from punk bands and try to find them, see if they have a box of records in their basement or something. And they finally found him, and he did have a box of records, so it immediately went down to like $300. And the guy, he started playing shows again, and he sent me a copy of the record thanking me for revitalizing his career, such as it is.
So win-win. You made $1,000 and you got the music back.
And I still got the record. But somebody reissued it as well. And that's my thing. Like, if I have a rare record and there's a reissue, I'll sell the rare original and buy the reissue for, an eighth of the price.
I'm totally with you on that. As long as some guy in the Ukraine didn't digitally remaster it or something, I just want the music. So I'm thinking about, I had to go through and replace all my old punk records, and God, it was expensive. I mean, like that Tales of Terror record, man, I just waited and waited and waited and waited. And finally my friend found one for like $199 and bought it for me.
They reissued it.
I know. And so finally. I should sell my original now.
Yeah. I bought the reissue, but I haven't sold the original yet.
Yeah, that record, I could talk about that record forever because a lot of people don't realize. You were there, that there's that one night at the Metropolis, they came up and played. And that was a time where, San Francisco was kind of a big brother city to us. They had a bigger punk rock scene that was a little more sort of self-aware kind of their place in the larger cultural context, whereas we didn't know with anything. People didn't really make records. I mean, we made demo tapes then. But when I just remember everybody's head opening up when they played, and it's like, that's it, because it had that Stooges DNA, that sort of dirt, loose, but they had the swagger, they had that fuzzy Ron Ashton guitar sound, the feedback. They were technically good, but they were also drunk on malt liquor, which was attractive.
They were really sloppy.
And I use that that record as an example of kind of one of the unknown impetuses of like that burgeoning Seattle scene,
Sure.
I mean, as evidenced by the fact that, Green River covered Ozzy.
Yeah, Green River covered Ozzy from that record, yeah.
And then, of course, they came back like 6 months later, and it was a complete shit show. I ate LSD with them before the show, and everybody was drinking Mickey's Big Mouths, and, it was just horrible.
Yeah.
I think it went to their heads. I think they knew what an impact they made, and they came back, and it was just awful.
It was like they were the best band, and then they were the worst band.
Yeah, and what a sad ending for so many of those guys. I guess Pat, the singer of Rat's Ass, is still alive, but I mean, I think he's the only one left. I know
one of the guitar players or bass player. No, the bass player got stabbed, right?
Dusty, right? Dusty Coffin.
Yeah. One of the guitar players is still alive and looks fairly healthy. The Rat's Ass had a stroke a few years back, so he's fairly incapacitated, from what I've heard. Some people I know were making a documentary about them. They were originally from Santa Cruz, and
I always thought they were just Inland Empire, or Sacramento.
They're Santa Cruz, yeah. And the documentary never got finished, but they interviewed me and Mark and Dan because we had all three, seen them at the Metropolis and probably at the Grey Door too.
March of Crimes opened that show, by the way. That's one of my small claims to fame. And Code of Honor was supposed to be the headliner. And the van broke down or something like that.
Well, Code of Honor did play the Metropolis though. They were great.
Right, but they didn't play that show. Because I have the flyer. It was March of Crimes, Tales of Terror, and Code of Honor. Code of Honor didn't show, and somebody else filled in. I don't remember who. But now the record collection grew far past punk, though. Like punk.
Yeah. Well, I started getting into psychedelia and 60s stuff. And
so like Rocky Erickson, 13th Floor Elevators. And
13th Floor Elevators were huge. When I first heard them, I was working at Raison d'Etre with Jeff Ament.
Yeah.
And the
chef. Did Andy work there for a while too, didn't he?
Not at the same time I did.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think he did. But the chef, whose name escapes me, was in that band PMA, Positive Mental Attitude.
Yeah, I remember.
Green River, the first show we played, opened for PMA at their kind of practice place house on 12th Avenue. But he was playing the 13th Floor Elevators, and I was just like, what the heck is this? Because the jug was just blowing my mind.
Right. It took me 20 years. A friend from Texas finally, what is that? It's like their signature sound. I'm like, is he doing something weird with the frets? I mean, I couldn't figure out what it was. And then my buddy, a Texas musician friend of mine, was like, no, man, that's the electric jug.
Yeah.
Such a cool sound.
But it's funny, there's actually interview footage of the 13th Floor Elevators. It might be I don't think it's Dick Clark, but it was some radio announcer asking like, how do you get that crazy sound from that jug? And the jug players was like, I don't know, I just blow.
Well, we're going down the rabbit hole with Steve Turner of Mudhoney. Let's start at the beginning for you musically. Now, there's a band that's sort of legendary in the Seattle lexicon, but never really even played a show. And it was a band that you and I were both in at different times, but nobody ever played a show, and that was the Ducky Boys.
Yeah.
And as I recall, wasn't Chris Peppard the singer? And you said he would.
Chris Peppard theoretically was a singer, but he was too embarrassed to sing into the microphone in front of us. So he just sat on the couch and watched me and Stone and Jeff rehearse Dr. Love and Louie Louie and whatever. But yeah, so it was like, this is Jeff Covell on drums and Stone Gossard on bass and me on guitar. And we started in the spring of '83, and we knew its end point was graduation or the summer because Jeff Covell was going down to California for college. So, we didn't think it was going to last or anything, but it's just funny because it kind of, this myth grew up around it, and, we played Dr. Love and Louie Louie and maybe something else, badly.
Okay, so no, I don't know if I was before or after you, but I played the bass, and the story behind the bass was it was Rick Friel. It was that little SG bass like Dennis Dunaway played with the short neck, and I didn't play a lick of bass, but I learned to play The Boys Are Back in Town. And we were going to do that song because, the Ducky Boys.
Right.
But I took that bass on tour. I was doing just a little mini tour with Feast of Friends, and it didn't have a case. We had borrowed it from Rick Friel. And Stoney was the one that borrowed it because he was friends with him, with the Friels. I met him through them. And so, Stoney kind of checked it out. Like, can I borrow this bass? And my friend's going to learn. And So I took it in the back of a cube truck with Danny Blossoms driving, and like you hit the brakes too fast, and and they cracked the headstock, And I tried to take it into wood shop and fix it, but there was always like a 1/4-inch lip. And so for 40 years, Rick Friedel hates me. I can't. The guy he still has a grudge against me because he has it in his mind that I sold it for heroin, which, I was never a junkie. I didn't make that choice, but he thinks I did, and he still hasn't forgiven me for it. So.
No,
maybe you're on better terms with Rick. You could.
Yeah, I am. I saw both
because I
Friedel brothers.
Convinced he has like a little voodoo doll.
Yeah. No, he's a sweetheart. I'm sure he's not that upset about it.
Yeah, because I'm great with Chris. I just want him to forgive me because I wasn't a junkie, and I felt so bad because that was such a great bass, and I only learned to play one song on it. So, Mr. Epp, Splooey Numa was first.
Well, right after Ducky Boys, I joined Splooey Numa in the summer of '83. I graduated high school in '83, so I joined Splooey Numa for a second, and quickly realized it was a mistake, and I shouldn't be in that band. You remember Charles Quain?
Yeah, well, he had all the great equipment. That was the kind of the scouting report. He was technically kind of good, precise or whatever, but like mostly he just had great equipment because his family had money. Wasn't that kind of
he was really
that was the reputation.
He was a bizarre person. And he basically looked at all my gear and told me I had to replace all of it. And I was like, no, I don't. I like my amp and I like my guitar, and I like my super fuzz pedal. I'm not replacing anything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The clean sound was the antithesis of what you were about.
And I just realized it was a mistake. And, I contributed the lyrics to that one dumb song, Stone Cold Rock and Roll, that me and Mark would get up on stage when they played shows after I quit the band.
I remember. And for like 7 minutes, too.
Yeah, that was really fun to do with them. But I joined Mr. Epp pretty quick after leaving Splooey Numa. And that, the other guys in Mr. Epp, I don't think were real happy about me joining the band either, except Mark.
Really?
Yeah, because
I mean,
they didn't want to go.
Your sound certainly. Were you too musical?
I think it was a little too musical and rockist, maybe. And
that's why I kicked Stoney out of March of Crimes, because he was a little bit too musical. He had a little bit more of a broader, arena rock sort of vibe. Like he had 2 guitar parts for the song. We're like, no. 4 chords, fast. That's all we want here. This isn't going to work.
Yeah. But
good move on my part, right?
But basically, I played the 2 shows with Mr. Epp, who was one of my favorite bands. And I have a twinge of guilt that, like, I think I ruined Mr. Epp. But,
I don't know if anybody could hear the difference, frankly. I mean, I just remember a wall of feedback and sound. For me, Mr. Epp was mostly about Joe Smitty. I just thought he was a genius.
Yeah, the drums,
he was just
and Smitty.
And he was older than you even. I mean, like you were a few years older than me. Smitty, it seemed like he was like 21, 22 at that time.
Smitty and Mark were both older than me. Mark's 3 years older than me, and I think Smitty's the same age as Mark.
Okay.
Yeah, and
old.
Yeah, exactly. But basically, after the second show, the other guys basically said, we're breaking the band up. So that's when me and Mark joined Limp Richards for a little while. Mark on drums, me on guitar. And we never played a show with that lineup.
Okay, so were you on the Limp Richards demo that had House of the Longacres version of that, and Ivor Fucks Clams or whatever it was called?
No, I never got to record anything.
You're after that.
It was basically the end of Limp Richards, too. We practiced a bunch and never played a show. And then me and Mark...
I'm starting to see a pattern here, Steve. Band killer.
There's definitely a band killer pattern here. But then me and Mark just kind of got tired of taking the bus down to Federal Way to practice if we're not going to play shows. And we started, coming up with a new band to form. And so that... It had to include Alex because he was our buddy and he played drums. So... It was me,
Alex Shumway. Shout out to Alex.
Yes, total shout out to Alex. And so we needed a bass player. And this is early '84, right? And Deranged Diction was on the scene, Jeff Amen on bass. And he played bass through a distortion pedal sometimes. And, we still wanted things to be really noisy and fuzzy. So we wanted him to join the band with us. But Jeff was not a fan of Mr. Epp. And we had to convince him that we were serious about forming a slightly more musical band. So I took a job at Raison Det because Jeff already worked there. And I got a job there to kind of, convince him to start a band with us, because Deranged Diction, they might have already been broken up, but they were doing some recordings, or I can't remember exactly what the deal was, but they were on their last legs, basically. So
and Jeff was an industrious guy. I mean, not only was he a good bass player, but he was like, he was a doer. You know what I mean?
Definitely.
Like, he had a bit of that impresario. That's all I ever had. I couldn't sing. I had no musical talent, but I was good at booking shows and getting us paid in weed. Or, but like Jeff kind of, I don't know. It seems like he at that point, he's a little older as well, and he kind of lent a legitimacy to a project just because he was like, he knew how to do this. He knew how to record people. He knew how to, he had a lot of experience.
He was ambitious in a good way, where he wanted to play music and he wanted to be in a good band, well recorded. I remember he loved SSD Control, who you already had mentioned, Boston hardcore. But he loved the sound of the Get It Away record and some other stuff there. So he actually called the guy that recorded those records, I think that is his name, Lou Giordano or something like that, and asked him how, give me some tricks to how you're recording this stuff. And like, he said, like, they did multiple guitar tracks, slightly detuning the guitar for the second time through to make it thicker and slightly, like kind of waver a little bit to make it thicker. And I remember Jeff telling me about that. Like, it's like, who calls some, Boston punk rock record producer for tips? Jeff.
Glad he didn't call Spot, because I'll go to my grave saying I think My War is a terribly produced record.
Yeah.
It sounds like you're playing it underwater.
Yeah.
I remember we recorded in Jeff's basement when they had that house. I don't remember who all was living there. And he recorded about 3 or 4 bands one Saturday. And I learned a lot. Like, I mean, it wasn't stereo. It wasn't multi-track. It was just single track recording. But so what he'd do is, like, to get sound separation, everybody was literally in a different room. Like, the drummer was in one room in the basement, and the guitar player was in a different room, and everybody just kind of poking their head over the doorway to play with each other. And it was amazing. You could be tight at all.
Yeah.
But like, it was a revelation how good it sounded. And I thought, okay, I can do this now. And I started recording some people using my Jeff Ament recording methods. And I recorded NPR, which is John Goodmanson's first band. And then I recorded a March of Crimes tape that we gave Jello Biafra the original copy of, and then we thought he lost it for 40 years. And it turns out Ben just texts him one day and he sends us a picture. He's got it. So we finally get it back. And I'm like really excited to hear my recording more than I am the songs. There were different songs that weren't on our demo tape. And when I got it, I was just so disappointed because it sounded like shit. It wasn't at all. Everything Jeff taught me was just in one ear, out the other, because mine sounded like crap. It was just, well, I never had any musical talent.
I'll go on the record saying that I thought March of Crimes was really great. I mean,
I appreciate that. Well, we were, we're probably not revelatory in any way, but I thought Ben and Steve and Andy were really talented. I thought I was just whatever. Anybody could stand in for me. Maybe have a little teenage charisma, but they would do some weird little jazzy interludes and stuff that I thought were pretty. I had nothing to do with it, but I thought they were pretty musically sophisticated.
Yeah. Well, Ben's a bit of a musician.
Yes, he is. Ben, of course, went on to play bass in Soundgarden.
And Hater.
Whatever.
And Wellwater Conspiracy.
Yeah. Hater. Now, there's a band you wonder, how the heck did that band stay together? That's some
They were great.
Big personalities.
Yeah.
All in one band. The Wood Brothers, Ben Shepherd. So then, after Mr. Rap, we go to Green River, and this is where, for, when we talk about the Seattle sound, this is where the sort of the twin rivers of what became that sound, because you got kind of half a Pearl Jam future and half a Mudhoney. And I know that I've heard you tell this story to me personally, and I also believe it's in the memoir that you co-wrote, Mud Ride, co-written with Adam Tepedalin, which is a fun ride. But you have some great stories about like the sort of the breaking apart of that band, or the different musical, because that band is like, it's really cool, but at the same time, it kind of doesn't know what it is. It's kind of a couple of sounds at once. That was always my...
Yeah. I mean, we started in 1984, and to my mind, hardcore had run its course. And I think just like a lot of hardcore kids and bands across the country and the world, everyone was trying to figure out where to take it, where to go next. And some of the bands kind of went straight to kind of a metal crossover thing, DRI and people like that. other people, like SST Records, kind of slowed down Black Flag and got weird. There was Texas happening with,
the drop D thing, which everybody claims, like, Ben claimed that he wrote the first drop D song, and it was actually a March of Crime song, but then later Kim added a chorus to it and they recorded it for Soundgarden. I don't know what song, but then I think I've probably heard Buzz Melvin claim that he did the first drop D song.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. I don't even really know how to explain what the drop D is, because I'm not a musician.
I was really, in 1984, Meat Puppets 2 really spun my head around, as did the Replacements' Hootenanny record. And, and there was Husker Du that was getting a bit more tuneful. And I liked, and because Replacements were obviously rooted in the garage, and I was just totally into 60s garage stuff. I'd become aware of the Sonics and the Wailers and, the heritage of the Northwest, in the 60s. And, I wanted it to be kind of something like that, just kind of all over the board. We were really into the Butthole Surfers, all sorts of, Tales of Terror, obviously. Things that weren't just straight up, hardcore. And, to me, the first record was a pretty great experiment trying to meld all these weird, diverse influences. Some of it worked, some of it didn't, to me. And after that record, the metal influence kind of got a little stronger, and
that was not your thing.
Not my thing at all. I'd tried. I'd had an open mind for a while. I went to see Slayer because the Melvin said it was great. They played Olympia and they were up on stage wearing t-shirts and jeans. Turns out it was because it was such a small show they didn't bother to put their outfits on. And so the Seattle show, they had all their big railroad spikes and stuff on, and and the crowd seemed even stupider than the punk crowd, which, I held in some disregard, I guess, at the time, and I was like, okay, this isn't for me. I think Kiss is a terrible band. It's not even funny to me. It's just dumb. It's like insulting.
Yeah, I was never part of the Kiss army. No. I mean, there really is. I mean, what else was out there targeting preteens, really? I mean, I guess AC/DC a little bit, but who's even adjacent to Kiss? I was just never...
No, I mean, AC/DC is great.
Person.
I love AC/DC.
Yeah.
But...
right, but that's the only other thing that I can think of that would appeal to an 11-year-old in any kind of similar way. But one was sort of slick and cloying, and the other was just badass rock and roll.
Right. But so the metal thing got a little bit intense in Green River, and they wanted to go on tour, and the batch of songs that we had, including the ones from Come On Down, I guess didn't want to play. Tunnel of Love was, I don't think I ever played it right, and that was like this very complex.
On purpose?
No, I guess it was this song that Jeff wrote that just kept changing slightly every repeat of the main riff and stuff, and I couldn't. It was like a 7-minute song, and it just kept changing, and I never knew how it went. Somehow in the studio, I faked my way through it enough that we released it, but it drove me crazy, and we were getting ready. They wanted to go on tour in a few months. I was like, I don't want to go on tour. I want to take college classes again, and blah blah, because that's what I was doing anyway, and. So I
like Milo before you.
Yeah. But I was just like, I can't do it, man. And, this was the time that, Jeff was living with Bruce Fairweather. And I just said, just get Bruce to play guitar. He's much more suited to you guys. And
he looks the part.
Yeah. And he
had the long mane of hair.
And, he joined the band, and the band got way better immediately. I think the Dry as a Bone EP and the 7-inch they did is the best Green River stuff in my mind.
Well, I admire your humility on that.
Well,
I will always take you in my band. But
I thought they were great after I left the band, and I was like, okay, cool, I can go see Green River now.
And so now this brings us up to only about 1986.
I quit in 85. Come On Down came out in 86. They did Rehab Doll that came out. Well, they recorded Rehab Doll in the fall, I think, of 87, and it didn't go well. and that's not my story because I wasn't there, but they broke up the band before Rehab Doll came out. And Mark called me on Halloween 1987 and said the Green River broke up, let's do another band. And I said, okay.
And enter Matt Lukin, right?
Enter Dan Peters first.
Okay.
And Ed Fotheringham was involved for a second. But
really doing what?
He was playing guitar and singing, or maybe just singing. I can't remember. But he didn't want to be in a real band that had to practice. He was like, this is boring. So, slowly Mudhoney formed, and Matt Lukin, I don't know if there was even another bass player we had in mind except Matt. We were just thinking, let's get Matt. He's not in the Melvins, Or at that point, we thought the Melvins had broken up. But
yeah, well,
that's another story. That's not my story.
That's a real quagmire there, depending on who you talk to. Yeah, we won't. That's for a different episode. If I can get Buzz on here, Buzz is somebody who will name names too.
Well,
so
I will say
what I mean.
Matt Lukin and Buzz have made up just recently.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. Well,
and I'm holding out my girlfriend,
I'm holding out
Andrea.
Hope for Foreigner and the Davies brothers. Then,
yeah. But Andrea really kind of helped that because Andrea and Lukin have become buddies, and she kind of greased the wheels there a little bit because Buzz texted me asking for Lukin's phone number, which I didn't have, but Andrea had. So she kind of like put them together, and they had a long.
I got to give a shout out to Andrea Blake. When we were discussing Andrea here, this is Steve's partner, and she's wonderful. I met her at Tree Fort, and Steve wasn't even there, and we got introduced because she knew I knew you, and like we became best pals. She's glue, She's one of those friends that brings everybody together. So I'm not surprised to hear that she was instrumental in that reconciliation. She just is great at bringing people together.
She's a uniter for sure.
Yes, a keeper too.
Yep.
So then, we're talking about 4 or 5 bands here in a 3-year period. And then Mudhoney starts in 87-ish. And here we are.
We say the official
37 years later. Yeah, and you're still.
We say it's January 1st, 1988 is the first rehearsal we had with Matt Lukin. So that's our birthday, New Year's Day. I think he came up to Seattle for like a Alice Cooper show or something. It was some show at, some big place.
So, what was immediately different? Going into it, it sounds like, let's just start another band. Let's get back on the horse. And you've gone through 4 or 5 bands at this. At what point, it seems like you finally found the right group of people who were all on the same page. There wasn't these different, it seemed like there was more of a commonality between the influences in that band or something, or because I remember when after with Green River, it was like, I remember everybody was starting to take vocal lessons, Cornell and Andy Wood was taking voice lessons. Everyone was in Mark was like, fuck that. I'm a punk rock singer. I don't want to. And so that was the you, Mark, Steve, that's a lineup of some of the most punk fucking guys I ever knew. You know what I mean? Just like, you're not worried about A&R guys sniffing around. You're doing it because you love it.
Yeah. I think when we got
is that
lucky,
something you recognized right away?
Well, me and Mark, after I had quit Green River, I moved up to Bellingham and was going to college up there. But me and Mark still totally kept in touch and were really influencing each other on records we would find, things that we thought were amazing, like The Scientists from Australia, Feed Time. There's a lot of Australian influence in the forming of Mudhoney, at least for the two of us. And we wanted to really simplify it from Green River. And, Feed Time was, legendary. And some of their songs were literally one note. They had a song called F sharp, and they never deviated from F sharp in the song. So that minimalism and punk rock and really dirty guitar sounds was, the Drunks with Guns, like these really obscure American bands that were post-hardcore but just noisy as heck. Anti-Scene, I loved how they sounded. They sounded terrible, but I loved it. Like, and I don't, in no disrespect to Anti-Scene, I think they are a great legendary band, but it was gnarly stuff, man. But they came out of the hardcore thing and they just made it more brutal, kind of. And I didn't want to be like some kind of brutal, like, evil thing, but I wanted to be like grungy. I will own the term grunge. If any band is grunge, Mudhoney is.
If any band is symptomatic of that sound, I mean, besides the Sonics as being is the kind of genesis of
Yeah.
it. I mean, for me, the EP, Super Fuzz Big Muff, that's my favorite record to ever come out of Seattle.
Well, thanks.
I mean, just with the lyrical content married to the music, to the looseness, to the I don't. So no inkling that this band is going to be together 36 years.
No. But, what was interesting about it was, Lucan knew where we were coming from because he'd been in the scene and he'd seen Mr. Epp and, Green River, obviously, and stuff. And we loved the Melvins, and Lucan's a total character. But Dan, I didn't know very well. I had jammed with him at a basement party in the University District once, and we just clicked, like me and him. And
he's such a cool dude, man.
Yeah, and he's such a great drummer, but his influences certainly weren't the same as me and Mark's were. Because me and Mark, he's a little older than me.
You guys love that Void record. I know that much.
Yeah. But Mark,
and you were both big Descendants fans.
Yeah, but Mark really influenced me a lot in the early days. And then I think as my obsessive record collecting grew, I was influencing him a lot too, as, in the years coming up to Mudhoney forming. And Dan didn't really know or really even like some of the stuff that I thought was great, but the great thing was me and Dan.
What were Dan's influences? Because I know what Dan's somebody who I just recently kind of reacquainted with. We'd met a few times back in the day, but I really got to visit him in Georgetown for the first time, really. And so I don't really know what were his musical influences. I know Matt's, I know yours, I know.
Well,
Mark's.
Dan's a real prog rock guy. He loves
interesting.
A lot of that UK early 70s prog stuff.
So are we talking about like Yes? And
no, like King Crimson. King Crimson is one of his favorite bands.
Okay.
Which I think King Crimson's great. They're weird as heck. But he liked that stuff. He liked really technically proficient music. We kind of dumbed Dan down a little bit. I mean, if you think about Bundle of Hiss and Feast, that he was in both of those bands, they definitely had a bit of a UK post-punk influence. That bass-heavy kind of sound. He loves Devo. He loves
kind of
Blondie.
A little bit of The Fall.
Yeah, he loves The Fall. Live at the Witch Trials is one of his favorite records ever.
He probably likes the Mekons.
I don't think he was aware of the Mekons. Like, I mean, when I had a radio show up in Bellingham in 1987, it was called Where Were You? After the second Mekon single.
Yeah.
I'm a big Mekons fan.
Yeah, me too.
But, Dan's kind of all over the map. But, we had to like learn what to do together, kind of, and we moved in together, me and Dan, and we were roommates for, 3 years or something like that. And, I kind of brainwashed him a little bit, I think, playing all the 77 punk and 60s garage stuff. He's a huge Soul fan.
Me too.
Yeah.
I wish I'd have known that, because I'd love to talk. My records go deepest into soul more than any other genre.
I think his might at this point too. He's more of a record collector than I am at this point. He goes out and he buys, hundreds of 7-inchers, just random 60s things when we're on tour. And I don't do that as much anymore. I did that when we were first going to England, because I could get all the 77 and 78 punk singles for £1.
Here's a question for you. Like, I don't know how this happened, because, as a huge Saints fan in the early 80s growing up, that was Aussie punk to me. How did Radio Birdman not arrive on my radar until late 90s, early aughts? I mean, because when I think I got Sub Pop reissued that record, or they were distributing it or something.
A box set or something, yeah.
And that record is like one of my favorite punk rock records of all time. And I'm just wondering, because I was aware of Australia even in the early 80s, what is the story with that? How did I not know that record?
I knew of it. The Saints' second record, Eternally Yours, and the Radio Birdman Radios Appear records were issued in the States, and they were immediate cutout records. So they were like, $2.99 at Tower or whatever. So, and the Saints record gets
I remember. I think My Eternally Yours has the corner cut off it.
I think they all do, like every American copy.
I think it was Stone Gossard's the one that turned me onto that record.
Stone
that was the one,
record.
and then I went to I'm Stranded, the first record after that one, but he was all about Misunderstood, and
it's a great record. You know, Mark is going down to Australia and singing for the Saints on tour. The Saints.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, the Ed Cooper, the guitar player, and the drummer, whose name escapes me at the moment.
Chris Bailey didn't die, did
Chris
he?
Bailey passed away.
I did not know that.
He passed away a few years ago. But yeah, so they're doing a Saints tour. Mick Harvey from the Bad Seeds and Birthday Party, he's playing guitar with them.
Yeah.
It's I wish I could be in Australia in November to see this.
That sounds super rad. I don't really know what that's going to sound like.
No, I don't either.
Like Mark is not intuitively the singer I would think of to replace, you know.
And he's stressing on it, you know, but he's going to do great, you know, but
that's good. I think as an artist, I know it's good when you're stressing on it.
Yeah.
I think that's good when you're pushing yourself, and because you're playing in a high stakes game.
This is a high stakes game.
Yeah.
I mean, the Saints are beloved.
Yeah, and for a great reason.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the soundtrack of my high school, man. I love those two records.
What's funny about Stone, you know, when I met Stone, he was this total metal dude. You know, like
he was hanging out with the guys from Shadow, Rob Weber, and
the Friel brothers
and the Friels,
but you know, he was such a little sarcastic jerk at the time, right? But
yeah, he was really funny. Now he's pretty buttoned up. He's still got a wry sense of humor, but like he was a sarcastic little fucker.
He was just a little jerk. Like a lot of the people at our school hated him. And, you know, he was a year younger than me. And, you know, we became friends because I could, you know, respond to his sarcasm as well as he could, you know, we could take and give, you know, in similar ways. And so we became buddies. And, you know, both he and Covell were, you know, metal dudes. And there was one book written about the Seattle scene that said, like, grunge started when, you know, Stone and Steve became friends because he was total metal and I was total punk. But he turned me on to some amazing music that I don't think I would have discovered. At least not right away.
He was a maven that way.
Yeah, like
and you know, Buzz Melvin was another guy in my life that turned me on to completely different stuff.
Right.
There was a lot of inner germinating. I mean, and I turned people on to, you know, I mean, I think that was one of the things that was unique about Seattle is because of its insularity in terms of its unawareness of its context, you know, in a bigger culture that, like, you know, I think I even said something similar when I wrote those Green River liner notes, which, like, you know, when I'd go down to San Francisco, it was, you know, all the mods were out front with their scooters and the leather punks were holding up this wall and the Nazi punks were over here. And it was all very stratified and cliquey. But in Seattle, it was like, you know, some black dude in a green leather jacket sitting next to a little white guy with a Gilligan's hat, and then some goth girl with a camera around her neck, and then some like heavy metal drummer with a tank top and biceps, and like they were in a band together. And I think that was like kind of what was so unique and amazing, and that's why, you know, and the fact that, you know,
it was allowed to germinate like that, and it was so small there was no reason to like not include anybody that wanted to be there. You know, like if you got 50 people at a show, that's 50 people, but they're not all from the same tribe because there wasn't enough people to have a tribe. I mean, there was like 5 mods in Seattle. You know, the U-Men crew were mods, but that wasn't a big tribe. And, you know, there was the skate punks were a small little unit, you know, and and, you know, Scotty with the green leather jacket.
Yeah, you knew who I was talking about, Scott Tacoma, as we called him, and his best friend, Ted Plank, was an interesting character.
I haven't
how those two...
Yeah, they were best buddies.
Yeah. Go figure. I mean, I can't think of two guys further apart. We won't go into that.
First time I saw Scotty was, I can't remember what show it was. It was at the Showbox, and he was this, you know, 6'5" black dude with a bright pink mohawk, like a big one, like it was like up high, you know. I was like, whoa, with the green leather jacket, of course. I was like, who is that? I
know, always smiling, just like a great guy. He was like one of those guys that was really tall, but like maybe he didn't want to be so tall because he had a little hunch in the shoulders and stuff.
Slouched. Yeah.
And he weighed about 130. But yeah, man, that guy, he just made you happy when you saw him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for me, that what you're saying about the tribe and everybody being different, like when it sort of gelled for me, and this is like Alex and I talk about this a lot. It was like our high school coming of age. You know, it was like we were a little younger. You know what I mean? But that, like, everybody was different. But like I felt like when Hugo opened the Metropolis and just sort of gave us the keys, and it was like the first time, because we'd had lots of clubs. You know, and the fire department would shut them down. I mean, Larry Reed had the Graven Image. There was lots of great clubs, and they'd come and go. But the Metropolis sort of brought that European vibe to us. You know what I mean? Like, it was more of a collective, and Hugo's like, I don't even really like this music, but like, you know, you guys are going to curate this space. You guys are going to help me book the shows. You guys are going to, it gave us, that's when I felt like it really came together as a community.
Totally. Yeah.
And,
100%.
And I think it survived onto the Guerrilla Guards. I think that's where a lot of us met. I mean, that and the Showbox. I mean, I know I met you and Alex and Mark probably all at the Showbox a couple years earlier, but like, by the time, I just remember being like 14 and showing up at the Metropolis, and it was like, you know, these are my people. Like, you're walking down the sidewalk where everyone's leaning up against the wall, and like everybody's happy to see you. And yeah, man, it was HallyCon days, buddy. I'm glad I had good times in life after that, because otherwise I'd be just a sad old man going, I peaked at 14.
Well, I think what was interesting about the Metropolis was it was also mostly a violence-free zone, and that's rare for punk rock places. You know, it was a community, you know, minded kind of place. It didn't seem like there was never any weird, even when something like, what was that band? Not Angry Hate, Negative Hate?
Extreme Hate?
Extreme Hate, sorry.
With Slam.
Yeah, but
he used to have the jacket that Slam plus Wendy equals sex.
Yeah, but he wasn't always in the, but that band was truly a dangerous band. They were, you know, there's a couple of bad people in that band. One of them
kind of like the Avengers, or not the Avengers. Who was the guy that the guys that would wear the hoods? Not the Avengers.
Not the Avengers. The Mentors.
One word name.
The Mentors.
Mentors. Yeah.
Yeah, they were just kind of a joke, though. You know, but you know, yeah. Extreme Hate they scared me, and I would. But even at their shows, there wasn't really violence as such. And, you know, did you know, speaking of SSD Control, Nancy Burrill, the wife of Al Burrill, the guitar player for SSD, she just wrote a book recently, which is great. And
right.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's called I'm Not Gonna Hold Your Coat.
And is this, so we're talking, is this early 80s Boston?
Well, she was a Philadelphia punk, and then she met Al and ended up moving up to Boston. And her depictions of Philadelphia hardcore shows in DC and New York and Boston, it was just a violent shit show. And we didn't have that, you know?
No. And I'd see it in San Francisco too. There's a lot of Nazi punk action.
And LA.
And in LA.
You know? But yeah, ours was a kind of a happy little punk scene.
It was. We were, I think everybody was just happy to find each other.
Yeah.
And, you know, back to Mudhoney occupying this sort of unique space, not only in the sound, but you also in this sort of rock stratosphere. You know, you didn't blow up in the way Soundgarden or Nirvana or Pearl Jam did. That was never who you were. It was never who you were going to be. But like, you did have the unique experience of supporting both Pearl Jam and Nirvana, I believe, on the same tour, right? Well, like that first year they broke, was that 93?
Yeah, it was 93. Both of them, I think both those tours were in 93. Yeah.
Okay, but they weren't on the same tour. You just supported them both that year.
We supported Nirvana first, and Pearl Jam asked us to do some shows with them. And, you know, the Nirvana tour didn't go well. They were very chaotic and disorganized, and everybody was unhappy. And it, you know, bummed us out because they were our pals and stuff. But
they were so talented. But yeah, you could just feel the angst.
Yeah.
And then I would imagine Pearl Jam was like a corporation compared to that.
Yeah, but they were so happy. The Pearl Jam crew they were organized and happy. And, you know, some of the people that we met on that first Pearl Jam tour still work with Pearl Jam. You know, like Pearl Jam was happy to be where they were. You know, they weren't trying to apologize for it. And it seemed like Nirvana, Kurt in particular, was trying to sort of apologize for it. And, you know, like, no, we're still punk rock. It's like, well, you might come from punk rock, but you're in a whole other stratosphere now, and deal with it. I guess accept it.
Yeah.
I
think with Kurt, he's probably more aligned with you and Mark. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I can imagine Mark probably would have had a pretty difficult time with, because he's
in those
punk
years,
rock.
yes.
He would have had a difficult time being suddenly famous and on MTV and like.
Yeah.
It's not an enviable position, whereas Jeff and Stoney were always kind of ambitious people. You know what I mean? And I think part of that is you learn that from your parents. And, Stoney had successful parents.
Yes.
And Kurt, he basically, he grew up in poverty and dysfunctional situations. And so nothing to equip him.
Yeah.
To,
I just wish they had realized the power that they had, at the time.
I'm going to ask you to talk just a couple more minutes about the thing that this is sort of a later revelation about me regarding you, because, we fell out of touch for a few years there. I had no idea about you and your folk music, you and just the guitar. That's new to me. I mean, I know it's not new to you, but I think that's something that surprises people who are just fans of you from Mudhoney. Talk to me about your attraction to, because it does. I mean, it seems it doesn't quite track with all the influences you're talking about.
Yeah. Well, like I said, my first favorite records were the Clancy Brothers, 2 records that my dad had. And
and you did mention the record of Edmund Fitzgerald.
Yes.
So that's...
but, somewhere in the late 80s, I went into a big Bob Dylan phase because Bob Dylan's, amazing. And again, the words matter there, even if they're nonsense sometimes, but you try to figure them out. And then I just started buying other folk records from that same era. And the first guy that I got really into was Phil Oakes.
Yeah.
He was a very political songwriter mainly, but he did a lot of other stuff that wasn't political that I thought was great. And these records were very cheap and easy to find. And so I just started buying anything that was on Elektra Records or Vanguard that looked like a folk record.
Mm-hmm. So were you into like Dave Van Ronk and guys like that?
I love Dave Van Ronk more than almost anybody.
My Uncle Buddy, the junkie who committed suicide by driving off an overpass, left me a Dave Van Ronk record.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to see him live twice. He played the Tractor Tavern, and me and Mark went and saw him down at McCabe's Guitar Shop, wherever that is down near LA, like near the beach or something. So yeah, I those kind of people. And it just kind of grew, and eventually I discovered the Nitty Gritty, Townes Van Zandt, and other people like that. They're a little bit more intense, I guess, and it just kind of grew from there. And somewhere in the early 90s, I started trying to write some songs and play guitar, and I wish I still had the notebook that I had the lyrics to them, because I was just so embarrassed by how terrible they were that I just gave up. And the next...
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
I listened to the March of Crimes lyrics recently.
Yeah. Well, or it's like, writing, half a book and realizing it's not working. But in 2001, I was living by myself in Seattle, and I spent Christmas alone. It was a beautiful, sunny Christmas day. And I said, I'm going to learn how to sing a song and play guitar at the same time, because I'd never really done that. I mean, I almost got there in 93, but it's kind of like drumming, or rubbing your belly and tapping your head or whatever.
Believe me. Yeah, no, I'm usually a good multitasker, but I've always been baffled how people can do that.
But I sat around on Christmas Day, and I actually learned how to sing a song. I wrote some weird lyrics down and threw some chords and, kind of did it. I said, well, that's pretty cool. And at the time I was working as a landscaper, and I had to be at work at 8 or something like that. And I would get up at 6 and I would play guitar an hour every morning before going to work. And, and I was actually getting better at it. And that was kind of exciting, because for me, punk rock guitar and stuff, like, the goal is not to get better. I didn't want to get better. And I would argue using people like, who's the Kinks, Dave Davies. He was the best lead guitarist in 1966. And by 1977, he was like the worst lead guitarist because he had gotten technically better. And then he was just like, not interesting anymore. But with folk music, I was trying to finger pick and learning things like that, and I was getting better, and I was writing songs. I wrote a crap ton of songs and made 2 basically folkish records until I got kind of bored with that. And around 2005, I decided to make a garage punk record, New Wave Punk Asshole, which was, more to what people might expect from me.
So they finally fused those elements.
Exactly.
He is Steve Turner. He's a punk rock god, a rock and roll god. He's a great guy. Proud to call him my friend. I thank you so much, Steve, for coming on A Fresh Face in Hell with me today and taking this trip to music.
Yeah, thank you. It's always good to talk to you.
And hopefully I will see you at Tree Fort, hopefully sooner.
Yeah.
All right, that was Steve Turner. This has been A Fresh Face in Hell with Jonathan Evison.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. A Fresh Face in Hell with Jonathan Evison is brought to you by Fresh Face TV and produced by Jason Botkin and yours truly. Check us out on Instagram. Find us on YouTube. Like and subscribe. If you love the podcast, by all means, run out and buy all of Jonathan Evison's award-winning novels, available wherever books are sold.